Greetings all. A lot goes on in the centuries following Western Rome's collapse. Remember, in the intervening period, the Church has come to be the main interceding power in the post-Roman West.
Around 600 CE, missionaries from Rome went to the Anglo-Saxon tribes of Britain. There were challenges: how to convert tribal leaders and translate their Christian faith into languages and concepts that made sense in a new cultural context. They needed to meld Roman practices with pagan ones by building churches on sacred sites and turning the worship of traditional gods into the rituals of Christianity. In the Middle Ages, the integration of three civilizations, the New Rome of Byzantium, the New Arabic Empire, which promoted Islam, and the Western European territories.
Negotiations survive in the monk Bede's 672 to 735, The History of the English Church and People, which shows how Roman Christian ideals would be adapted to meet new needs. The term Middle Ages is a modern invention. In the 17th century, intellectuals argued that there's an intermediate period, a medieval period, which separated their own modern age from the accomplishments of Greece and Rome, which, as I'm sure will become apparent, I continually push back on in this course.
Meanwhile, in the East, we have Justinian and his rivals. The eastern and western territories of Rome's long empire divided among linguistical, cultural, and economic lines. In the 4th century, it was division political. The man responsible for this was Justinian, who reigned between 527 and 565. He was the most ambitious emperor since Constantine. He saw himself as the heir to the Principate, which was established by Augustus. And like Augustus, he was aided by an astute and determined wife, Theodora.
And oh, how Procopius would hate them both. But I digress. The Ostrogothic conquest of Italy briefly placed Constantinople in a position to influence affairs in the old Roman heartland. But the kingdom would be overthrown in 535 in an attempt to reunify the Roman Empire. Justinian's efforts failed, but had a lasting influence on the entire Mediterranean. Justinian himself, from the Latin-speaking province of Dardania, modern-day Serbia, he was originally a peasant, adopted and educated by his uncle Justin, who actually set Justinian up as emperor.
Now, Justinian would not lay down and simply relinquish the West. His efforts to reunite the Roman Empire seemed successful. There were illusory early victories. In 533, Belisarius conquered the Vandal kingdom of northwest Africa. He then campaigned in Ostrogothic Italy and Visigothic Spain. By 536, ready to occupy Rome. The human and financial costs would drain the empire.
The Romans of Italy and North Africa as well would resent the costs of their quote-unquote liberation. When the imperial armies were withdrawn from these regions to deal with the growing threat in Persia, North Africa would be ripe for conquest by the Arabs. The eventual withdrawal from the legions from North Africa left the region vulnerable also to the rise of Islam, which will become important later. Here we have the Mediterranean world at the time of Justinian. Compare this map with the map in your textbook. Here, the green shading represents those regions controlled by the Eastern Roman Empire. What was the geographical extent of Justinian's territory? Which areas of the former Roman Empire did Justinian not manage to reconquer? What may have been the geographic and military obstacle to the attempted campaign's reconquest?
Despite its ultimate failure, Justinian's attempts of conquest was not doomed from the start. However, as previously stated, the early victories were illusory. although the Mediterranean was still under Roman control. The human and financial costs of these campaigns strained imperial resources. Belisarius's army in Italy was overextended. Justinian's need to levy soldiers led to oppressive taxes on important regions such as Egypt and Syria. There were wars of reconquest, more devastating than the barbarian incursions. The Lombard invasion in 568 takes the northern third of the Italian peninsula. There were tensions between the Arian Visigoths, and the Roman subjects would continue in Spain.
Plague would take things from bad to worse. The plague affected his western campaigns, which were getting bogged down in Italy. Aqueducts would be cut, the elaborate system of conduits. The drainage ditches and the reservoirs would be destroyed. Some areas would revert to marshland. The Lombards would invade in 568, taking the north, and only the south would be held by Constantinople, with Rome, of course, in between. The tensions between the Arian Visigoths and Roman subjects would continue in Spain, but even after the Visigothic king would convert to Roman Christianity in 587. Note, Arianism really hangs on in western Spain. The hostility would continue until the Visigothic kingdom was converted and absorbed by the Islamic empires.
As if plague and problems from the west were not bad enough, a new power from the east was rising, the Sasanids. They would employ some powerful Jewish allies as well. Sasanid expands while Rome is occupied elsewhere. New phase of Judaism's development in Persia during the diaspora is accordingly known as Rabbinic Judaism. It soon influenced the establishment of similar schools and traditions in Jewish communities throughout the medieval world. A group of powerful and learned rabbis worked to keep Judaism not only alive but flourishing. They established special schools, the yeshivas, for the study of the Torah. They presided over the codification of the Talmud, a collection of writings that preserve centuries of oral teachings and legal judgments in the 6th century.
The Persian Empire, under the control of the Sassanid dynasty, had long rivaled Rome. It expanded its reach while Justinian's forces are away in the west. In Persia, many Palestinian Jews had found a home after the Romans' destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. They would join older Jewish communities in Babylonia.
In addition to Persia and the reconquest of the West, Justinian faced the challenge of a pandemic in 541 to 542, the Justinianic plague. This was caused by an early strain of the same virus that later spawned the Black Death of the 14th century. And of course, the sophisticated Roman infrastructure helped to spread it. And just as deadly and widespread, it stretched from China to Scandinavia. It killed a large percentage of the world's population at that time, some 25 million people, and recurred in some areas for 200 years.
Author's note and pushback against the writers of this text. I would like to state that Yersinia pestis is a bacterium and not a virus. In some circles, Justinian is best known for his codification of Roman law. When Justinian assumed power in 527, his first initiative was legal reform under a team of lawyers led by Tribonian. The results would come in 2 years. The code of a systematic compilation of imperial statutes, supplemented by another book, the Novels, which contained the legislation of Justinian and his immediate successors. And by 532, the commission completed the Digest, a summary of the writings of Rome's great legal authorities, including the jurists of the Principate.
Justinian's most lasting accomplishment was legal. The body of Roman law had grown massive and self-contradictory. In the Eastern Roman Empire, which became the foundation on which all subsequent legal developments would rest, little known in Western Europe for centuries, It eventually influenced the legal systems of many nations. Later, the Institutes, a textbook of legal principles, were also important in the fundamental principle that the state is a corporate body, not the extension of an individual's private property. The modern conception of the state as a public entity derives from the legal maxims of the corpus. It had an impact on political philosophy. The maxim that what pleases the prince has the force of law, used later to justify absolutism.
Here we have Justinian and Theodora, these 6th century mosaics from the Church of San Vitale in the imperial capital of Ravenna, Italy. They show the emperor and the empress proceeding toward the main altar of the church, carrying the holy vessels used for the consecration of the bread and the wine. What do these images convey about the sacred and secular powers of both figures? What do they suggest about the role of gender in the representation of power?
Back to the Corpus Juris Civilis. 4 volumes that constitute the Corpus Juris Civilis, body of civil law. They also supplemented some constitutional forms of government. They maintain that a sovereign's powers are delegated to him by the people. That which is mandated by the people can also be taken away by them.
Ah, the 4 volumes. As stated previously, they are the Code, which is a compilation of moral statutes. The novels are novellae, the new laws. The Digest, the writings of Rome's great legal authorities. And, of course, the Institutes, the textbook of legal principles.
Remember, the Byzantine Empire was a Roman empire. Byzantium became a Roman heir and not the sole successor of Rome, but called their empire Rome, and saw themselves as carrying forward Roman traditions, values, and institutions. But by 610, the Greek-speaking imperial dynasty that had begun with Heraclius, who reigned from 610 to 641, faced trouble. The Persians had conquered almost all the empire's eastern and southern territories. They had plundered Jerusalem and carried off the cross on which Jesus was crucified. Some historians see it as a separate empire of Byzantium. Citizens saw themselves as direct and unbroken inheritors of Rome's legacy. They never used any name but Romans for themselves, and they called their empire Rome.
I am not one of the historians. The Byzantines cannot, at this stage, be separated from their Roman heritage. They are Roman. With the failure of Justinian's project of reunification, the history of the Eastern Roman Empire enters a new phase, that is to say, the Byzantine Empire, which of course is derived from Byzantium. With an enormous effort, Heraclius rallied his forces, routed the Persians, recaptured Jerusalem, and retrieved the relic in 627. These gains would be short-lived. Arab armies inspired by Islam would take the eastern provinces, as well as Egypt, North Africa, and they would lay siege to Constantinople. This new threat would be countered by Emperor Leo III, 717 to 41, and his use of Greek fire, something we're still not sure on the formulation of.
The Byzantines would be pushed back to the Adriatic in the west. We look at the Persians, their conquest of Jerusalem and their theft of the relics of the original cross. Heraclius routs the Persians, reconquers Jerusalem in 627 CE. In Islam, by 650 CE, Arabs seized most of the Byzantine Empire that was formerly Persian.
We'll get more into the origins of Islam later, but suffice to say, Jerusalem is in the hands of the Muslims, the entire Persian Empire is defeated and destroyed. North Africa is invaded, Constantinople is threatened in 677, Emperor Leo repels the Arabs in 717 via his use of Greek fire. But they do have a reconquest of the most imperial heartlands of Anatolia effectively Asia Minor. Here we have the secret weapon of Byzantium, Greek fire, illustrated in a chronicle by John Scalitzes, a Byzantine historian who flourished in the 11th century. This manuscript is a copy from Sicily during the 12th century, and it is now preserved in the Biblioteca Nacional de España in Madrid. And yes, that's as good as my Spanish gets.
Internal politics within the empire were tumultuous. The success of the empire based on efficient bureaucratic practices and strong, self-perpetuating political institutions. We have the role of Constantinople as a trade emporium. And there was an economic revival, especially with agriculture.
The popular sport of chariot racing was strictly regulated. The government also regulated the army, the navy, the corps, the diplomatic service. It endowed these agencies with organizational strengths incomparable for their time. They were strong, self perpetuating political institutions, which constituted a major source of this stability. It doesn't matter if your leaders are inept or if life is falling apart around you, if the base structure of society keeps on chugging. Power is concentrated in the court at Constantinople. Emperors followed their predecessors by claiming autonomous rule. Opposition to imperial authority could take the form of intrigue, treason, or violent plots. But the longevity of the core provinces of the empire will last about 1,000 years.
We can summarize the Byzantine Empire as follows. Centralized government continued to function in Constantinople. The imperial bureaucracy regulated prices and wages, maintained systems of licensing, and controlled exports and trade. Highly educated officials who supervised many aspects of social and cultural life, overseeing schools, the organization of the Orthodox Church, and the observance of religious rites and holidays. A well-integrated and sophisticated economy. The commerce and cities, Antioch, continued to flourish as they had done in late antiquity. Constantinople became a central emporium for Eastern luxury goods and Western raw materials. The empire also nurtured and protected its own industries, most notably the manufacture and weaving of silk.
West had no large cities, no sophisticated trade networks, and little currency. Byzantine trade and industry produced most of the surplus wealth that sustained the state. Agriculture was at the heart of the Byzantine economy. The peasant farmers struggled to maintain their independence from wealthy landowners and monasteries. When the aristocracy gained control of the land during the 11th century, free peasants were transformed into poor tenant farmers, as had been the case in Italy during the 3rd century.
Let's transition to an examination of the role of religion in government, a topic central to the new medieval world, specifically Orthodoxy, Monasticism, and Iconoclasm. The stakes of theological and doctrinal disputes heightened because emperors took an active role in them. Most contentious issue came to a head in the 8th century. Iconoclastic controversy over the use of religious images and representations. Some Christians expressed their devotion to Christ and saints through the making and veneration of images. Other Christians said that any representation of a holy person is close to being a form of idolatry.
The insistence that images were only aids for worship, not objects of worship, but the distinction would be very fine and the line could be easily crossed. Remember, the images traditionally by the church are used to instruct those who cannot read. This is why stained glass is so important. The iconoclasts themselves, though, would advocate destroying icons, arguing that honoring images was blasphemous because they were made by human beings who are thereby setting up gods other than God. Traditionalists argued that the images themselves were never objects of worship, rather windows with which they can glimpse the light of heaven. that would be granted to us on earth.
Iconoclasm was a controversial subject, to be sure. Christians had long been accustomed to expressing their devotion to Christ and saints through images. Luke is a painter of the first icon. Some Christians began to argue that representations verged on idolatry. Christian teachers insisted images are aids to worship and not objects of worship. Emperor Leo III initiated the iconoclastic movement.
And why might he have done this? Possibly he could have been influenced by the new rising Islam. Possible political and economic considerations should be made, though, and the clash between emperor and his monasteries. Remember, by destroying these sometimes very valuable, sometimes made of gold, icons, that he can then claim their value as being recyclable for state use. It's also a way of robbing monasteries of some of their authority. The iconoclast movement, of course, initiated by Leo III. Keep in mind, this is the same guy who saves Constantinople from the Arab invasion and who would rebuild imperial authority, right? His main political and economic motive may have been that by proclaiming a new radical religious movement, the emperor could strengthen his control over the church to combat the growing power of monasteries, not just economically, like I mentioned with the icons, but politically. Here's no devotional image, or is it a dangerous idol? I'll let you decide. This is an icon of the Virgin Mary, the bud bearer, the Theotokos in Greek. It was painted in the 6th century and is one of the oldest such images to survive. It's preserved in the Orthodox monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai in Egypt, and it shows the mother and child flanked by two warrior saints protected by angels gazing upward at the hand of God emerging from heaven. How might such an icon inspire devotion and shape viewers' ideas of femininity and motherhood? According to the proponents of iconoclasm, why would such an image be considered blasphemous?
Icon dualism may have been the answer. Controversy resolved toward the end of the 8th century in favor of those who promoted religious imagery, the iconols, image servants, but effects. Destruction of much art produced or preserved in the Eastern Roman Empire. So early Christian artistry preserved only in areas beyond the reach of the iconoclast emperors. There's a widening of a religious breach between the East and the West. Iconoclasm called into question the veneration of the saints and the Roman Papa as Peter's successor. There's a fear of heresy, which tended to inhibit intellectual freedom.
Here's where we see the church being both conservative and asinine. It had to happen eventually. But there's a renewed emphasis on the Orthodox faith, which marginalizes Christians in Syria and Armenia. But we will get to them and much more next time as we cover more on the Byzantines, their schools of thought, and we move well past the realm of Justinian and the birth of the Byzantines.